Kosovo war started, I was aware that there was tension in Kosovo, but I hadn't been here. When the Kosovo war started, I was actually in Canada, and I was learning to fly airplanes, which is an enthusiasm of mine. And the war started here, and I thought, okay, maybe I should go back to the Balkans. So I actually arrived about probably 2 months late for the war. I arrived in the early summer of 1998.
And what was the feeling like the first days when you entered Kosovo, like a new place? How was the feeling?
You know, in the beginning of 1998, as you know, there was the Pleq massacre. But when I came in the early summer, things had calmed down a little bit. The KLA controlled quite a lot of the countryside, especially in the Drenica area, and there wasn't that much fighting. So in a way, I had a kind of a soft entry into the war. There was some fighting, but it wasn't very large scale. And so that was what I got used to at the beginning. But then, of course, coming into the late summer, into the autumn, it began to change and it began to get much more serious.
Yeah. And during the time you were reporting about the lost war in Kosovo, you also were a witness of one of the most terrible massacres that happened in Kosovo, which was in Abrisë, in the region of Drenas. There, more than 20 members of the Deliu family were killed. Also, we have the paper from the archives where you were writing for the Daily Telegraph there. So could you tell us how you went there and how was your experience reporting for that family, which they lost more than 20 members?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this one is actually from Pleq, which is later. So I covered several different massacres. Yeah. And yes, Abrisë was the first big massacre I covered. I mean, I wasn't there when it happened, and I wasn't even there immediately after it happened. My colleague Vaughan Smith was there. So I didn't get there until several days later. But then I met Deliu, who was the uncle of a little boy called Besnik, who was the oldest survivor of the massacre. And somehow I was captivated is not quite the right word, but I felt that this story had to be covered, that it had to be followed. And I was working with Leman, who was my translator, and we worked very well together as a team. And Umer took us to the site of where he had buried the bodies after the Abrisë massacre. There were 23 victims. And while we were at the site, we were standing there. It was very depressing. It was a very, very sad scene. You know, the graves of lots of women and children, and some very young children. And while we were there, the Serbs were still based in Likovce, which was only 1 or 2 kilometers away. And they started first shooting at us, and then shelling the place with mortars. And I think that made me really, really angry. I mean, I was angry before, but that really irritated me. So I came back to Pristina that day, and I remember going live on BBC Lunchtime News. I didn't work for the BBC. I worked for the Daily Telegraph, but I went on BBC Lunchtime News and reported what was happening. And then I maintained the relationship with that family for